Welcome to the Mindful Return podcast. I'm Kelly Tuttle, a retired neurology nurse practitioner and brain injury survivor. Together, we'll explore practical tools and real stories to help you rebuild focus, confidence, and a meaningful life after a brain injury. Hey, and welcome back to the Mindful Return. I'm excited you're here today. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about what to do when your disability accommodations are denied by your employer. And this is very sad when this happens and frustrating. My previous episode, when I talked about how to ask for accommodations, I talked about how disability accommodations benefit the employee who's disabled, but also the other employees around that disabled employee. And that, in effect, it really supports the bottom line of the employer. So when an employer is resistant to provide disability accommodations, they're really just kind of shooting themselves in the foot. So in the previous episode, I talked about the American Disabilities Act. So when asking for accommodations, you really want to become familiar with that and the organizations that go with that, both on the state and the federal level. You want to make sure that federally, your employer has to have 15 or more employees in order for the ADA to be applicable. When going through the disability accommodations requests, the expectation is that the employer and the employee will, in good faith, will create an interactive process, meaning they'll be back and forth during the discussions of the accommodations on both sides. Now, I have heard from other brain injury survivors of how supportive their employers are regarding their accommodations. So there are some really happy stories out there. Unfortunately, I'm not someone who has 100% a happy story. So I've had a little bit of experience with kind of the frustrations of going through the process. I have heard other stories from other employees, and it can be demoralizing when, there's a law that provides workers' rights for disabled workers, and that you find actually there's a big difference between the letter of the law and the reality of being an employee for an employer. If that is the case, then make sure you're getting the support you can as you go through this process. Reach out to, trusted family and friends to kind of vent and explain what's going on. And if necessary, share it with your support group, pals, and your mental health specialists to help you kind of cope and maintain your resilience as you go through the process. And the other thing you want to do to support your resilience is to make sure you're exercising, that you're getting your sleep that you need, at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night, that you're eating healthy, practice your mindfulness, journal, make sure you're managing your finances, that you're on budget, you're not worried about paying bills and so forth, in addition to going through this process with your employer. And then, get the help that you also need, whether that's talking to an employment lawyer or involving your union rep if you are part of a union. All right, so let's talk about some of the steps that you can take if your accommodations are denied. The first step is to ask why they are denied. And this will give you more information that maybe your employer needs more information from your medical provider, or maybe more information why you need this accommodation. Maybe a different accommodation might work. So it's really important to get the reason why they are not supporting the accommodation that you requested. In the interactive process, be ready to suggest alternatives, such as if you asked for work from home, if your employer doesn't want you working from home, then maybe the alternative would be then for the employer to provide a private office for you to work in. and to make sure that your accommodations are reasonable. I talked in a previous episode of consulting with the website askjan.org, where they have a list of reasonable accommodations that are used within the human resource industry. The other thing while going through the interactive process is to be willing and open to try suggested accommodations by your employer. This will show that you're interacting fairly through the process and you're willing to try alternatives, even if you're sitting there going, that's not going to work for me. Just do a trial run for just a week or two and then give feedback why the accommodation was not supportive in writing back to whoever it is that you're working with, whether it's the HR specialist or your management or both. And then be prepared to provide additional information, maybe having your doctor fill out a questionnaire from your human resource department, or maybe re-explaining why a certain accommodation is needed. And then before going through the process, make sure you're aware of your HR policies regarding how to ask for accommodations. If your accommodation is denied, look to see if your employer has an appeal process. And if they do, then appeal the denial and see if things can move forward from there. And like I said, also include your union rep. They can be really helpful in this process. It's always nice to have a second person in the room that is on your side during this process. Keep all records of written and verbal communication. And if it's verbal, make sure you note the time, place, with who you had the conversation and if there were other witnesses. And then, if necessary, be prepared to document any retaliation from asking for these accommodations. And that could be where a manager is singling you out, or that you're seeing microaggressions from your manager or your coworkers. So one of the excuses you might be given for your accommodation not being approved is that it will cause undue hardship. And what is undue hardship? So this is when the employer believes an accommodation would be disruptive to their business operations or cost too much to implement. So they can't just say it's just undue hardship. Your employer has to give a reasonable reason why they can't provide you that accommodation. So if you get if you're told that your disability accommodation is being refused due to undue hardship, try to get the details as to why the employer believes that it's an undue hardship and keep track of those reasons. And it's nice to have that information because it can help support the ongoing interactive process when you're kind of understanding where your employer's coming from. But you could also have a toxic employer who just uses that as an excuse to not provide you with the accommodation. Now, during the process of requesting accommodations, you do deserve to be treated fairly and with respect. Some people who go through this process are treated well, and then some employees who go through this process of requesting disability accommodations are treated poorly and disrespectful by their employers and their HR members. If that does happen, reach out to an employment lawyer. There's also advocacy groups that you can contact and consult with, and then check your state for fair employment agencies that can help support you in your endeavors of trying to get those accommodations and recommendations for next step. My cat's going to join me. Say hi, Cotton. I hope that you do have a good interactive process with your employer. It's only going to support and enhance your relationship with your coworkers and your managers, if so, and that everything goes smoothly. Let me know your stories in the comments. I'd really love to hear about it. Take care, get better, get stronger. You've been listening to the Mindful Return podcast with me, Kelly Tuttle. Subscribe wherever you listen and head to kellytuttle.org for brain injury recovery tools, free resources, and inspiration to help you return to work with confidence and hope.